Since version 8.1 of the Identity Manager, we are able just to prohibit the start of specific One Identity Manager applications. And this is possible because, as you can see here in Designer, in program functions exists a new set of program functions starting always with application start. And if my scenario, for example, is that I want to start any application in the Identity Manager, but I should not be able to start job queue info, then I have to ensure that the specific system user I log in will not support here the job queue info application, which particularly means that application start job queue info is not assigned to that specific user. To figure out how to handle that, I like to step you through that scenario. That means I create a user, this is already done, which is my no job queue info, and no job queue info will be the user which can start every application beside job queue info. To ensure, the first step I have to do is to figure out which particular permission is not to be assignable, or which particular permission is not assigned. Therefore, I step to program functions again. Here we are. I'm searching for application start and then job queue info. And here application start job queue info is. And if I click on that and I step here to the mission group button, then you can see assigned is this particular feature to all of these VI4 permissions and TSP4 permissions, which is not of interest right now because I want to create a system user and not a role-based user. So VID features is the only one I have to care of. So what I have to do in order to configure what I like to configure is if I step to this no job queue info user, I can assign every of these groups, what I already did, beside VID features. This is the only group I cannot assign. So to leave it unassigned at the end means that I don't be able to start any of these Identity Manager tools. The reason is all of these start permissions are assigned to VID features. VID features is not assigned, so I don't have the permission to start one of these tools. So what I have to do here, and this is the same way what everybody have to do, I have to copy VID features because I cannot change VID features. Remember, VID features is an out-of-the-box thing, and if I try to change it, I will fail. So select VID features, step to permission groups and say, hey, copy this specific permission group. So again, what is the group I want to copy? It is VID features. So let's have a look here, VID features, and it should be CCC features, no job queue info. And with that, I can just copy it. Next step, I want to take all permissions with me. I want to take all navigation with me. I don't want to take system user assignments with me because this is what I at the end want to do manually. Next. Here we are. Finished. So, and instead of just assigning VID features, I will now assign this specific group. This is part 1 of the story. Part 2 of the story is that I want to ensure that this specific feature is not assigned to that specific group. Therefore, again, I step back to program features. I'm searching for job queue info in my application start features. Here we are. I step to permission groups. I can now see that CCC feature is already assigned. I remove the assignment. Wonderful. And with commit to the database, now the specific tool is not anymore assigned. Next step and last step is to test the whole thing. So in order to do so, I just close my manager, for example, which is my specific test. Database, close connection. And I sign in my manager. And here we are. It looks like that manager is working pretty well. Now let's try the same with job queue info. This is job queue info. At present, I'm signed in as Herwig. Close connection, database, new connection, and I have to sign in with no job queue info. And here we are. You are not allowed to run this application. Pretty nice feature. You have seen how to configure it, and that's it, what you need. Granular SQL Server permissions are something where we talk about since the last couple of years. As you remember, in Identity Manager, security is just defined and given by the API of the One Identity Manager. From a SQL Server perspective, the only thing that have to be exists is a SQL connection. In the past, our recommendation was just to say there's one SQL user and it's a local SQL user, and this SQL user will have access to all database tables, especially because the One Identity Manager frontend is limiting this SQL access. This is good from our perspective as long as the user behind the One Identity frontend is not aware of the permissions. That means not aware of the account name and the password to sign into the database with something other else than the Identity Manager. Because of that, please remember as well, Active Directory accounts was every time the wrong choice just to be used for this specific SQL database access. The reason is that with an Active Directory account assigned, I think we discussed that in another video series, it's the permission video series by the way, this Active Directory account will allow a typical user as well to use something other else than the Identity Manager, for example a SQL Studio or something which can talk SQL, to access the database and then to bypass the complete security and business logic implemented in the One Identity Manager API. Long story short, in a lot of projects, a lot of discussion happens, especially with SQL admins, and these SQL admins was teaching us or telling us that it makes sense from their perspective to limit the amount of permissions of this SQL user. Maybe by creating more than one SQL user with access to different parts of the database, so that even if we are using another type of security, which is the API security, the SQL access behind it's a little bit more limited than full control to everything. Therefore, in the world of the SQL Server, we can use SQL Server permission groups. As we all know, in the past we had not used them. Now with version 8.1 first time, such groups can be used and they can be implemented from the scratch. What's to do there is that during the migration to 8.1 you have to answer that question if you want to implement such groups or not. As you can see on that deck, there are now three particular groups. One for end users. This will be users just work with use data, for example like the standard web portal does. There is another one just for configuration users. These are the typical users we know and we need for the designer. And there is one for administrative users, which is for server services or configuration wizards or administrative tools. This means not that the One Identity Manager security is now obsolete. This is not the case. This means only that the SQL user behind the One Identity Manager security can be limited. And that means if somebody gets, for example, aware of the password and the account name of such a SQL user, he cannot use just other tools, or he can use other tools to sign in, but because of the more limited SQL permission set, he's not able to change everything. Nevertheless, there's enough space just to damage something, and because of that, it keeps correct that we will use SQL users, we will not use Active Directory users, because we want not that our users behind Identity Manager front ends are able to use an Excel or to use, for example, a SQL Studio to change something in the database. Nevertheless, we should have in mind that even if we can now use these groups, it is not, I like to say, very wise to create a lot of these groups. Out of the box we created 3, that is what is on the slide. And is of course, technically you can create as many groups as you like to, but at the end you have to accumulate permissions always to support these roles here on the slide. And if you do something like that, then you will assign some groups just to reach the same permission set, because the permission set at the end, it's important to work with front ends. And we should as well not forget that some of these admin tools needs configuration permissions. And so I like to say the split on the SQL side will generate a little bit more security, but on the other hand side, it will as well generate a little bit more complexity to our system. And everybody on its own have to figure out if this more on security, what we get with the help of this, it makes sense to have it for this specific situation. Last but not least, All of these group names can be renamed. You can manage these groups if you like to in Designer. There you will find them in the base data section. And at the end, you will as well see them in the login mask directly at the end of the database connection string.